Hello everyone, my name is Nikolaos Tzifakis and I'm the project coordinator of the newly launched Horizon project named Empowering the Geopolitical EU in the Eastern Neighbourhood and the Western Balkans, or if you prefer the abbreviation, GEO-POWER-EU. This is today's our kickoff meeting. We're just getting started. And on the sidelines of this, we have a small, I'm going very briefly to present the project, and then we're going to have a panel discussion about contemporary developments with members of the consortium. So, okay, so this project starts with a series of assumptions. The Russian invasion of Ukraine challenged many of our assumptions about European security. It is conventional wisdom that there is a need to review and revise EU policies towards the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership countries. The EU's decision to offer a membership perspective to Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia brought for the first time the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership countries under the same policy radar, which is the one of the EU enlargement policy. Here, however, we have two challenges. The first is that the two regions have been so far studied separately. The second and most important issue is that the EU enlargement policy has stagnated for over a decade. In other words, Eastern Partnership countries were transferred to a policy framework that does not seem to work. The EU claimed that the Russian aggression on Ukraine brought about its geopolitical awakening. The Union has made decisions that were unthinkable before the war's outbreak. However, the EU has not emerged yet as a fully fledged geopolitical power. Some analysts reasonably wonder how the EU would have reacted to the Russian aggression had the United States not been so invested to the cause. Crucially, Russia's destabilizing activity in Europe does not end with the use of lethal military power in the periphery. Moscow's contemporary malign activities exploit an array of tools and methods that take advantage of vulnerabilities such as freedom of the media, assembly, and expression. And in the field of geoeconomics, China and Turkey and the Gulf countries are similarly making non-transparent deals in the two regions that undermine the EU reform agenda and strengthen the rule of authoritarian-minded leaderships. So there is a pressing need for strategic foresight, and the main objective of our program is to contribute to the empowerment of the EU to manage security threats within the deteriorating geopolitical environment that lies in its eastern neighborhood and the Western Balkans. Our main ambition is to articulate a proposal for a comprehensive EU strategy towards these two regions that will employ new and reform means and policy instruments, taking into consideration foresight concerning the strategic aspiration of other geopolitical actors. In particular, we'll try to advance 6 specific objectives. The first is to analyze the effectiveness of EU enlargement policy and the adequacy of its current tools and resources for the integration of countries with EU membership perspective. The second is to interrogate the continued relevance of the Eastern Partnership of the Eastern Partnership for the European Neighbourhood policy. The third objective is to assess the influence of other geopolitical actors, precisely the United States, Russia, China, and Turkey, in the two regions. The fourth is to provide strategic foresight about the prospects of geopolitical competition. The fifth is to increase the EU strategic autonomy and its ability to contain military threats that emanate from the deteriorating geopolitical environment beyond its borders. And the sixth, to propose a comprehensive and multidimensional EU strategy that will guide relations with the Western Balkan and Eastern Partnership countries. This is a very rough work plan that I'm not going into details at this short presentation. I'm going just to give 2 examples of our attempt to diagnose the problem. The first is discussing the stagnation in EU enlargement policy. There is much discussion, there is an extensive academic literature where focusing on specific issues. One is to discern the perceptual gap between the EU policies and expectations and needs of the countries under examination. We want to see what the EU thinks works in the region and what the region believes about the EU policies and the EU instruments have been applied so far. And the second twin challenge that we're going to investigate is the economic convergence or the lack of economic convergence and the struggle against immigration and brain drain and the trouble and the challenge of green energy transition without imperiling energy security or aggravating energy poverty. Another final example of a problem diagnosis is an attempt to measure, to assess the influence of other geopolitical actors in the two regions. We'll first of all build a continuously updated interdependence database with data about the linkage of geopolitical actors with countries in the two regions, which means data about trade, FDI, about military agreements, diplomatic visits and contacts, flows of people among external actors in the two regions. The second is to measure the external geopolitical influence in the two regions through the construction of three indices. The first interdependence index that will measure the breadth of interdependence between external actors and countries in the two regions. The second index about the exposure, the vulnerability of countries in the two regions to external influences. And the third is the extent to which, the strategic autonomy index, the extent to which those countries are experiencing limitations to their choices. And the third part is again to focus on two critical challenges. The one is government gaps and their exploitation by the corrosive capital of companies from geopolitical actors. And the second is how this information is strategically used by third countries. Following the diagnosis of the problems, we will produce strategic foresight. Very briefly, we'll try to develop all alternative scenarios concerning the ambition and policies of geopolitical actors in the two regions. We'll identify the most plausible and consistent scenarios and sub-scenarios, and then we will test them and assess their implications with the use of a serious game. And at the end, once we have come up with some concrete policy recommendation and ideas, we will test them, we'll present them in workshops and multi-stakeholder co-creation studios in different countries with the aim of testing them, fine-tune them, and try to co-create with other colleagues and other stakeholders and decision makers who are not members of the consortium, our final policy prescriptions, and at the end, a single strategic framework that will also take note of the result of the strategic foresight and the scenario testing on geopolitical competition. This is the consortium. We are 15 partners. You will see that there are partners from the three Eastern Partnership countries, which is the Georgian Foundation for Strategic and International Studies, the Odessa Metsikov National University, and the Institute for Development and Social Initiatives Vitorul in Moldova. There are also countries from the there are also partners from the Western Balkans. There is the University of Rijeka in Croatia, the Faculty of Political Science in the University of Belgrade, the Institute of Democracy Societas Civilis Skopje in North Macedonia, and then an array of partners in different EU members. Beyond us, the University of the Peloponnese, there is the University of Bologna, Democratization Policy Council in Berlin, which has also field presence in Bosnia, the European Neighbourhood Council in Brussels, Southeast European Research Center in Thessaloniki, which is the host today of our kickoff meeting, the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and two partners in Austria, the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, and the Vienna and the V-Inside. Finally, these are our social media accounts. They are all active. You can already start to follow us and see the progress in our activity. The website is coming soon. It's not yet ready. Thanks for being with us, and let's pass to a discussion. We have no findings at the beginning of the projects, but that have been very awkward. We have much more the opportunity to discuss contemporary developments in two regions that produce a lot of events with 5 members of the consortium. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nikos. Hello, everyone. So I've got an excellent group of people with me to discuss the challenges facing the European neighbourhood and the Western Balkans and the consequences for the EU. So I'll just go through the order of the speakers so you know what to expect. So we'll start with Olga Brussilowska, who is Professor of International Relations at Odessa National University, and Kaga Gogolashvili, who is a Senior Fellow and Director of the European Studies Programme at the Georgian Foundation for Strategic and International Studies. They will talk about the Eastern neighbourhood. We'll then turn to the Western Balkans, with Zena Pelec, who is Assistant Professor at the University of Rijeka, and Vladimir Jovanovic, who is an economist responsible for the Western Balkans at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. Finally, Alberto Bernini, who is online with us here, from the European Commission, will talk about the EU's responses. Each speaker will talk for, I think it's like 5 to 7 minutes, very precise, thereabouts. And we'll then open it up to questions from the floor and also for anyone online who have any questions. I understand you can type your questions if you have any, but I have people with me who will hopefully tell me if there are any questions. So that's it in terms of what we're planning to do. So there should be time also for the panelists to respond to each other. But we'll start with Olga, who will talk about it.
Thank you so much. As you understand, this is a very important role for me to start this panel, and I think this is a good sign that you are really interested in Ukraine and that you are supporting us, and this is really very important for the country. But at the same time, as you understand, after the 2 years of war in Ukraine, sometimes there are narratives in different sources that the European Union and all our partners are a little bit tired of this war, and they want to end this war in some way or other way. As you understand, this is not so good sign for us Ukrainians, because we have another choice. We need to fight, and we need to win this war, because we fight for our independence. I hope that all our European partners understand it, and the role of the European Union is really very important and fruitful from the very beginning. So, why you shouldn't be so tired of this war? Why? Because, of course, the Russian-Ukrainian war is not global conflict. This is local conflict. Despite of everything you can read in Russian sources. Because in Russian sources, this is just proxy war between the USA and the Russian Federation on the soil of Ukraine. This is not true. This is really local conflict, but the local conflict with global consequences. And we can just check every spheres of human activities. And if we start from economics, almost everybody understands that the current war is ruined Ukrainian as well as Russian economies. But this is important not only for Ukraine and Russia. This is very important for the world, especially for the global south, for the Middle East, Africa. First of all, I know that we have huge food and fertilizer problems, because you know about the importance of Ukraine and Russian grain for some countries like Lebanon. This country now in the deepest economic crisis for 100 years. The same situation in Egypt, in Nigeria, in other countries of Africa and the Middle East. So now we have about 50 million of people who are in deep danger because of Russian-Ukrainian war. This is huge number, 50 million people, plus people who were in danger before the start of this war. The next problem is security, and this is closer to the European Union, of course, because first of all, I talk about security of Central and Eastern Europe. And my idea that Russian-Ukrainian war is only the start of big problems for this region. Because we understand that if politics of Putin will be successful in Ukraine, there will be next step. We don't know to Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, or Poland, but it will be. So all the region is now like a big zone of uncertainty and danger. And the scenarios for future, I read a lot of different articles, books, and policy papers, and I understand that there is no good scenario for future. We have worse or better, but not good, not perfect scenario. This is problem for the next several decades. First of all, this war was a big mistake for Russia because this is suicidal path for Russia. Russia looks like a global failure after the beginning of the war, and of course for Ukraine there is no good scenario too. Because the worst scenario is occupation of a part of Ukrainian territory, maybe even a bigger part than nowadays. Maybe we talk about all central and eastern Ukraine. This is the worst scenario. Of course, not all territory of Ukraine will be occupied, but some part will. The more realistic scenario is not very good for this one too, because we talk about protracted positional war for years and years. And I understand that this is not only for us, but for the European Union, for the USA, all our partners. But this is reality, and we just need to know what we need to do, because this is reality. And of course, there is no good news for Central and Eastern Europe, and not only because it's a threat of Kremlin, but because of many economic problems. At the same time, I'm more optimistic about this region, Central and Eastern Europe, because previously inside the EU, the voices of post-communist countries were very moderate, and there were some contradictions between older and younger participants of the EU, but now I see that voices of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia are more relevant and more influential in the organization, and this is very good. And we have a very fruitful new organization, regional organization, like Bucharest 9 initiative, like CIS initiative, and we are fully agree with the politics of this organization. This is very important for Ukraine. And if we talk about global level of consequences of the Russian-Ukrainian war, we understand that the European Union really is more proactive than previously. And the European Union does a very good job, as for me, in the sphere of cybersecurity and struggle with Russian misinformation. But of course, we need together to improve this sphere of common interests. And maybe only one more very important for me problem I need to say about it. This is the new nuclear strategy of Russia, because this is a threat on the global level. And we need to understand that now we can see new nuclear blackmail from the side of Kremlin on the Ukrainian soil. I mean, first of all, shelling of Ukrainian nuclear power plants. Firstly, in the human history, nuclear power plants were shelling. And of course, we need to cooperate and to struggle with this suicidal path of the Russian Federation. If Russian politics will be successful, this is a threat for many countries with nuclear power plants like Romania, like Taiwan, and other countries. And I think this is just some ideas I can share with you. And if you have some questions, of course, I'm ready to answer. Thank you.
Thanks so much for talking to us about the terrible challenges facing Ukraine and the problems and consequences of those. I invite you now, Hannah, to talk about the wider challenges for the region.
Yes, well, thank you very much. First of all, I was delighted to participate in today's meeting. I saw that the consortium really started very efficiently, so I wish us to continue with the same motivation. About Russia, I think that Russia conducts the open kinetic war in Ukraine, but in reality, the war is wider. It's not just local war. The war which Russia conducts now is a minimum regional war. But of course, that's starting from the doctrine that Russia developed in its beginning of 2000s. The war can be conducted by different means, and the not less intensive war which Russia conducts in the region is a hybrid war. And this hybrid war is destructive. It disrupts. Disrupts the country from inside without using maybe bombs. Sometimes the threat of use of force is evident, but not aired in a direct way. So I will attack you. But the rumors, the different type of propaganda information and different type of reactions from Russia, it gives impression that there is a threat of use of force from their side. But it changes the values in the society. It changes it destroys the confidence in this. It destroys the belief of citizens in their own state, in the values which they used to follow before, or in their aspirations. For example, such aspirations as Euro-Atlantic, joining Euro-Atlantic structures, or integrating with the EU, developing democracy, so reaching the equality. All these things are destroyed by Russian hybrid means, including, of course, first of all, propaganda, and also undermining the country by penetrating in different institutions. They're using so-called active operations, so using the agents of influence, etc., etc. So, and finally, changing the mood in the country and changing the positions in the country. Also, threatening, supporting, corrupting the governments. The cases are very, very, I think, very evident and concrete. With Moldova, for example, for years, Moldovan governments and Moldovan politicians were corrupted by Russia. They were very well known means how they were involving Moldovan, for example, there's politicians into the businesses related to Russia, giving them preferences in these businesses, so participating in the trade. The same they were using in Georgia, maybe not so openly before. But fortunately, in Moldova, there is now the government, which and the political force in majority of the parliament, which is very strongly so resisting to these Russian hybrid intentions. Still, it's not secure, and it's not, you cannot be sure about the future of the country as far as the big part of population is under strong Russian influence, and they're believing in different messages, they're believing in different Eurosceptical ideas, or absolutely disoriented, and judgment is somehow missing. The same happens in Georgia. So I was, years ago, I was tracing, when it didn't, there was not the case in Georgia, it was already the case in Moldova. And I was tracing what happens in Moldova, what kind of messages Russian state uses there, how it is corrupting the people there, or etc., etc. So, and actually, I was feeling that this will come soon in Georgia. It came very soon in Georgia, but not was so successful, less successful. But as we see now, that finally Russia succeeded also in Georgia even more than in Moldova, because in Moldova, finally, as I told already, the government, the people have chosen the government which is resistant, which is resilient, and strongly resilient towards this kind of attempts. But in Georgia, it happens that we see that in the recent situation in Georgia opened absolutely different reality. We used to live in different reality. Few years ago, even not believing very much in our government, I couldn't imagine that they would dare to make such statements, to start such attacks against the opinion in the country, and destroying the beliefs in people, in Euro-Atlantic values, and confusing people with that. So it seems that the Georgian government and the majority in the parliament, practically they now receive directly messages from Kremlin, I say, because they are, this is a type of coordinated attack, and even Kremlin is not involved directly in this, which is the very, we know these messages come from there, but they are aired by official representatives of Georgian government against their own people. And the people, 80% of people is pro-European. They support in any polls in Georgia, sometimes 85, sometimes 80, well, the minimum there was 70%, which strongly was in favor of European integration. But now we see that the situation is that with 80% people supporting European integration, they're there to air the Eurosceptical ideas, and not only Eurosceptical, but sometimes fantastic ideas about some existing global world parties somewhere in the West. We don't know where exactly, but when Prime Minister is very serious, he says that we are on the, so sometimes somebody pushes us to start war, so to enter the war with Russia. They even don't say in Russia. Their messages are much more much more cloudy, we should start war somewhere with somebody, and there is some forces which push us towards this, and the opposition, which is radical opposition, and non-governmental organizations who are the agents of influence of these global war parties, etc. They create, they make, so I think they push the situation in this direction. So I think it sounds like a conspiracy theory, no? It's a very, we also see that this is a conspiracy theory, but this is very serious. Having in the country the government, the parliament, and the informal ruler like Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is coming to the meeting, they are bringing people from regions, so they're spending money to bring as much as possible people from the regions. Those people who work, who receive money from us, from taxpayers, budgetary organizations, so-called organizations financed out of budget, like the teachers from the kindergartens, from schools, the people working in local governments, etc., and in government established non-governmental organizations, you know, this kind of the levels, so-called legal entities under the public law. So, and they mushroomed in this government. So they are paying the money, our money, they are paying to the citizens' money. And they oblige them to support, to come to the meeting in Tbilisi, and then Ivanishvili comes to this surrealistic situation, together with all the Georgian Dream team, and he makes a speech where half of the speech is against the European Union and against the United States. This is very serious, by the way. Against the United States, against the European Union, and naming some global war party who influenced the European Parliament. If European Parliament makes a resolution blaming Georgian government and requesting from Georgian government to change this, etc., etc. So this is a type of surrealistic situation, but very real at the same time, very real threat to Georgia. But it's not threat only to Georgia, because I think that Georgia, Armenia, these are the core countries in the Caucasus now. The Azerbaijan is a very important country, but it is secured because of Turkish relations. The Turkish consider Azerbaijan as a one nation, two countries. So there will be not possible for Russia to attack Azerbaijan at any rate. But who are the weak points? Geopolitically, weak points are Georgia and Armenia. These two countries turned to become more and more European, pro-European, and it was necessary somehow to catch them and to bring back to the Russian orbit. In Armenia, we see the situation that after losing Karabakh, Armenia started drifting towards Europe, and they are more and more detaching themselves from Russian influence, from Russian structures. But as regards to Georgia, they succeeded somehow to catch the government and the government rights. But they need also the people should be in their favor. Because in Armenia, they have 50% pro-Russian people still. In Georgia, they have only 20-30% pro-Russians. So Georgia's situation is not fully satisfactory. Now they need to continue this hybrid attempts in order to change also opinion in Georgia, to create an agent like foreign finance organizations, agents of influence of this global war party. They cannot dare to say directly that this is influenced by EU or US and they are destroying Georgia as a country. But they started talking about about sovereignty. So sovereignty against the democracy, against the foreign values, against the Western values. So would you like to be sovereign country? So and under sovereignty, they mean sovereignty of their own power. I mean the leading party, sovereignty of this leading party to decide something. And the example that they understand sovereignty under this example is that they adopted the law, as you know very well. All this the law about this exactly the same law with some differences, of course. The spirit of the law and main parameters of the law. I will not go through describe now. There is no time. They adopted the law, which was protested by people, 200,000 people on streets during 1.5 months. Well, sometimes 30, 40,000, but there were moments when 200,000 people were on street. Everybody, international organizations, the biggest partners of Georgia, EU, US, and I don't know, German chancellor or the French president, or everybody make warnings to them. Don't do this. This is a Russian law, and this is dedicated to exterminate civil society in the country. If you exterminate civil society, then you kill the democracy or prospects for democracy. There is no democracy. You see Russia or Belarus, when the regime succeeded fully, when they destroyed civil society, no critical views. They can make any election, any falsification in the country, everything without civil society. So they are destroying civil society, and they dared to adopt this law anyway with such protest, and they say we are majority in the parliament. They have in the parliament 8 people more than there is 50%, and 50% plus 8. But this is not such a majority in order to ignore the absolutely well demonstrated will of the people. You have no even constitutional majority, but even if you have constitutional majority in democratic state, it never happens that you adopt law without consulting any stakeholders, without consulting civil society organizations or anybody else. You adopt, and after such a protest of 1.5 months of the protest, you adopt anyway this. And there is reactions and now what we have sanctioned government. US sanctioned already our representatives of our government, of our parliament. Not everybody, they just started with the travel bans, but they, in the United States, Congress and Senate initiated 2 bills, and they will unite these bills, and it will start. And also European Parliament adopted a resolution. Georgia will be deprived, at least they demand from the countries to Georgia to be deprived of the candidate status, to stop the visa-free, etc., etc. In this situation, government still continues. How we can classify this or qualify? I can just qualify that Georgian government is now fully transmitting, or it's a transit. It's a Russian. We will. Going through Georgian government, whatever Russia wanted to see, or Putin wanted to see to happen in Georgia, it happens through this government. That's what I will stop here. I understand that I took too much, but I also understand that the interest should be very high, because it's really very unique situation. What happens with Georgia needs much analysis, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this very sobering analysis. It's clearly much more to cover than what we got in 5 minutes. So,
I'm sorry.
No problem at all. So we'll now turn our attention to the Western Balkans and the challenges faced by this region, which are similar but also different in some ways.
Sure. Thank you, Nina, and thank you very much to my colleagues from Ukraine and Georgia. It's really, well, an honor to speak after you, because in a way, coming from the Balkans and looking at even Russia from the Balkans, it's just so inspiring to see the amount of people really, coming together and behind the flag of the European Union, and being so inspired by this dream still. Unfortunately, in the Western Balkans, the situation is not quite the same in terms of enthusiasm, for reasons that I will get to, and I think Vladimir will also get to later on. But on the other hand, the issue with geopolitical competition are in some ways similar. Fortunately, the security problems are not as hot as they are in Ukraine and Georgia, but I think that the only this vignette of Eurovision being interrupted by the public broadcaster in Serbia and tuning into the visit of Xi Jinping tells you a thing or two about the kind of the priorities of Serbia in terms of geopolitical alliances. So, the appetite for Europe and the willingness to strike friendships with other partners. So in my remarks, I will focus on a few notions that might complicate and maybe nuance, hopefully, our understanding of geopolitical competition in the region. Because of course, it is at the end of the day, for us as academics, a very important task to offer nuanced and sometimes complicated analysis, sometimes not very pleasant to hear. But at the same time, we need this diagnosis in order to be able to get to good policy solutions. So my first point will be coming, again, on this friendship between Serbia and China. You can see that the partnership between them is called, the steel friendship and the strategic partnership that's been set up at national level. So very often these kind of partnerships are set up and approved by agreements that transcend the laws and the regulations of the individual countries. So basically they are elevated at a kind of national security status. And so therefore these deals, these economic deals, very often bypass any, transparency regulations, any kind of other laws that other investors should be bound to. And this indeed has an array of adverse impacts. I mean, governance and economic issues and corruption are one, but we've also seen environmental impact in the case of Chinese presence in places such as Balkans, Neighbourhood in Serbia, or as Tuzla in Bosnia, and so on and so forth. It also brings sometimes adverse impact in terms of human rights and labor rights and so on and so forth. But the important point that I would like to stress here is that it's not unidirectional. So it's not only China in this case, or Russia, or other, non-Western countries coming in and having a malign influence in the Western Balkans, but it's really a synergy of failures, quoting some colleagues from Queen's College London who coined this term, between the local actors and the international actors. So the fact that the local actors have allowed for these rules to be bent and have invited this external influence is what allowed this influence to be so malign. So in this way also, it reminds me what you mentioned about Putin and Ivanishvili and about a host of actors also in Ukraine that have been playing, to Russia's tune, also because they were co-opted by Russia and they were willing to be co-opted, right? So it's important to look at this kind of interaction and not only sticking to the monodirectional kind of bad influence coming in direction. Then the second assumption that I would like to challenge is that the external competition, external geopolitical influence is aimed at changing the status quo. Very often we see that these actors are actually using the status quo itself to achieve their needs and their aims. So in the same kind of example, if you have corrupt actors, actually it's this clientelism that is very validated, unfortunately, still in some places in the Balkans, that allows for these actors to play into it, right, to use these clientelistic networks and reach their own aims. And at the same time, of course, by using these means, they end up reinforcing the status quo itself, because then the rents, the bribes that go and are being divided among these actors, both local and foreign, end up reinforcing these power structures, these parties, these politicians, these businessmen, and so on and so forth. The following point I would like to make is that it's easier to implement this synergy of failures strategy if you have some sort of meeting of minds, culturally and politically.
Thank you so much, Stina, for this really important analysis of the interaction of international and local dynamics. So I'll now hear about the macroeconomic situation, a bit more about the macroeconomic situation in the region. So,
thanks a lot. So I'm from the Western Balkans, but I live and work in Vienna, which I always say this when I speak about the EU and the Western Balkans, puts me in a very comfortable position because I can criticize both sides. And I usually tailor my criticism, and I'm very critical, as you will see, depending on where I sit. When I'm in the EU, I criticize the EU. When I'm in the Balkans, I criticize the Balkans. So today we're in the EU, okay, in the Balkans, but not the Western Balkans. And I will be criticizing the EU. And I'm a macro guy, and macroeconomists like numbers, and I'll bore you with some numbers. I'll start with the simplest indicator of quality of life, let's say, of people, which is GDP, gross domestic product, or average income in a country, per capita, per person, as a share of EU average, if you take control, if you account of different price levels, which is called in economics PCP, purchasing power parity. So I will give you the average level of development of the Western Balkans right now as a share of GDP is around 40%. As a share of the EU GDP. Slightly less, but let's say 40%. 10 years ago, this was around 35% of GDP, of EU GDP. We usually want to say we want to reach the EU level of development. That means that if you take this trend from the past 10 years, we'll need 120 years to get to 100% of EU level. In 120 years, the planet won't exist, I'm pretty sure. We'll destroy the planet by then. So we'll never get to the EU level of development. I think we have to realize that. Another example. If you take, we are talking about, EU and Balkans and EU integration. In 2007, Bulgaria, before Bulgaria became EU member state, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Montenegro had very similar levels of development. They were both around, the three of them, are around 40% of EU incomes per capita. Now, Serbia and Montenegro are around 50%, slightly less than 50%. Montenegro is at 70% of EU income levels. So that tells you that EU can really make a difference in terms of living standards. Yes, Bulgaria is the poorest or one of the poorest EU member states, but it's still much better than the best of the Western Balkans, which are Serbia and Montenegro. So what I'm saying is that the EU failed the Western Balkans. The EU let the Western Balkans down. This is one of the indicators of economic development. I'll give you another example. The first thing that comes to my mind when we speak about the EU and Thessaloniki is, I'm not sure how many of you will remember, because most of you are young, the Thessaloniki summit from 2003. So I was a student back then, finishing my bachelor studies. I remember that in 2003, they said the future of the Western Balkans is in the EU. 20 years later, 21 years later, there's virtually no progress there. If you take, for example, take Serbia and Montenegro, which are the most advanced in terms of EU integration in the region. They applied for EU membership in 2009. 15 years later, they had opened, I don't know how many chapters, but they are still very far from joining the EU. If you compare this to existing EU member states from Central and Eastern Europe, Czechia, Slovakia, all these countries, Slovenia, on average, these countries took around 9 years to join the EU from application to EU membership. Serbia and Montenegro, which are the most advanced, took so far 15 years and will certainly take, in the best case scenario, 10 more years. So we are certainly, much, much worse. North Macedonia, the worst of all, the most let down of all, is waiting 20 years to start the EU negotiations. It hasn't started the EU negotiations yet. It has the latest Franco-French proposal for change of amendment of the constitution yet again, in order to start the accession process. 20 years to start the negotiations. So the EU has let the Western Balkans down, and we have to be very, very well aware of that. So what I'm saying is, because I agree with what most of the others said previously, and I guess most of the other people here think that the region is kind of sliding towards, Russia, China, other countries. Yes, Chinese presence, economic presence in the region is big. Last year, Serbia had around 1/3 of the FDI, of the foreign investment in Serbia, came from China, as much as from the whole EU. So Serbia had around 4 billion foreign investment in 2022. Of those 4 billion, 1.5 billion came from China, 1.5 billion came from the EU. So yes, clearly, we know Xi Jinping, brother Xi, whatever. Yes, Serbia is sliding towards China, but I'm not blaming it on Serbia, I'm not blaming it on Serbs or Serbians, I'm not blaming it on the Chinese, I'm blaming it on the EU. The EU is clearly letting the region down, is failing to integrate the region more closely towards to hug the region, let's put it that way. And because of that, politicians there and people, they see no alternative than to talk to other players. Let me give another indicator. There is this study which is published every year by the Regional Cooperation Council, which is called Balkan Barometer. It measures perceptions of people in the Western Balkans. And it's one of the indicators, one of the questions it has, like, is EU good for your country? In 2020, 62% of the people who live in the Western Balkans, 62, said yes, EU is good for us. In 2024, that percentage fell to 54%. So almost 10 percentage point decline in 4 years, from 62 to 54. It tells you that people are really getting disappointed. So another thing now, we are talking about, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova joining the EU. I agree with that. That should be done, especially about Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that you should forget about the Western Balkans. Some of these countries have been in a similar situation. Bosnia had a war 30 years ago. We forgot about that. So we must not forget about the Western Balkans and the problems they had and still have, while we are thinking about this new reality. And also another reason, if we want to think geopolitically, yes, it's good that the EU is kind of, spreading east. But if you leave a hole in your heart, like the Western Balkans, and you let the Chinese or Russians came in, I used to play Reciprocal, this game, it's like, you go to conquer another continent there, but you have like huge territory in your continent here. You're losing the game. It's a simple game. I'm not a geopolitician. I'm a pure economist, but still, with simple logic, you're leaving a hole which will spread. So, yeah, I'm coming to a conclusion. So what I'm trying to say is that the EU need to grow up. The EU needs to change its strategy towards the region. And unless it does that, we should not be surprised if the region is turning towards Chinese or Russians or whoever other actor is, because the EU is in a way living a vacuum space, which other actors are very, very willing to step in, to fill in. And what should the EU concretely do? The first best solution is fast accession, fast integration of the Western Balkans into the EU. I know that's not realistic, nobody wants to talk about it, but if you ask me, it should be done tomorrow. If you cannot do it tomorrow, say in 5 years, if you cannot say in 5 years, say by 2030, if you cannot really do that, you cannot promise to do that. And I know what you will say, that corruption, bullshit, China, whatever. Corruption. What happened to Romania and Bulgaria? I mean, it's the best case to tell you that if you can do it, because Bulgaria and Romania, if you look at all the indicators, were worse than the Western Balkans when they were joining the EU. Take any indicators, you will have these World Bank measures of corruption and whatever. Bulgaria and Romania were worse than what is Serbia now in most of these indicators. And you could do it for Bulgaria and Romania, and you don't want to do it for Serbia and Montenegro and the others in the Western Balkans. So if you did it for them, you could still do it for the Western Balkans. So yes, that's the first best solution. If you don't want to do it, if it's unrealistic or whatever, the second best option is integrate the Western Balkans in the EU budget. Yes, you won't have the Western Balkans voting there, blocking their processes if they are full members, as if they were full members. But the Western Balkans will benefit from greater financial support from the EU budget. Just to give you another example of the magnitude of this, currently the Western Balkans are getting around 1% of their GDP on average for the last 10 years from IPA funds, instrument for pre-accession. These are EU money that the EU is giving to the Western Balkan countries. 1% of GDP. What, for example, Hungary is getting is around 3-4% of its GDP. All the economic growth that Hungary had in the last 10 years came from EU money. If Hungary didn't have EU money, it won't grow, it will stagnate. Not just Hungary, also these countries. So if you can do that for Hungary and the others, you can of course do for the Western Balkans. It will cost nothing, the EU budget. We did studies, calculations on this. All the current countries who contribute to the EU budget will give slightly more, but peanuts basically. Germany, which is contributing most of the EU budget, will need to give like 0.04, mentioned once again, of its GDP, percent of its GDP, in order for the Western Balkans to become fully integrated into the EU budget. So peanuts for the EU, for the EU member states, but it will bring significant benefits for the Western Balkans. So yes, that's all from me. And yeah, hope at least I managed to provoke some thoughts.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy, for these important and some concerning numbers that I think might not have meant to. I think you ended on a slightly optimistic note, but it was just peanuts. But let's hear from the EU now and focus on the EU response. So Alberto, I hope you can hear us okay. So we've clearly covered a lot, and we wanted to to respond to all of this. But I'd like to ask you to focus on two things. So firstly, how the EU supports the two regions in combating some of these hybrid threats that we've heard about. And secondly, the challenges that the EU faces in integrating the two regions, perhaps also responding to Branimir's argument that the EU has failed the Western Balkans.
Yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you can hear me well because the sound coming from the room is not the best. I count that this is the case. I'm the policy officer, just to clarify, and the policy officer for this project, as for a few other projects about the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership countries, which are managed by the GRTD, by the DG for Research and Innovation, which is running the programming of the Horizon Europe planning program. So just to briefly give a contextualization of what are the actions, what are the policies of the European Union when it comes to combating and countering hybrid threats. I certainly need to mention that the hybrid threats are an issue, a concern, which is very high in the agenda of the current Commission, of the finishing Commission, of the von der Leyen Commission, and it certainly is going to be very important for the next one. For the next College of Commissioner. Just a very quick disclaimer. I just like to remind that combating hybrid threats is not necessarily a crucial responsibility of the European Union. This is mostly responsibility of the member states. But the Union certainly does a very important role, which is the one of providing some sort of a coordinated response at the EU level. Because as we know, a lot of the hybrid threats that we are referring to, such as disinformation and foreign interference, are by nature transnational. And also, of course, the European Union and more specifically the Commission takes care of coordinating the efforts of the member states with like-minded countries, such as the US, or in the context of international organizations like the UN or international fora like the G7, for instance. So the Commission has been outlining and developing a number of initiatives to counter the hybrid threats for the member states, but also in the neighborhood countries and clearly the accession countries, with a number of policy initiatives. Certainly those which are the most important are those relating to cybersecurity and to foster, to improve the capabilities of the member states and of the Union to react, to respond to the cyber attacks. Also, in terms of critical infrastructures, before and after the attack to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, certainly this is one of the main activities of the cabinet to securing free and fair elections. This is also very relevant, especially after the clear interference in French or also European elections, the last European elections of last Sunday, but also in the previous cycles. And certainly the Commission has been particularly active in outlining a series of initiatives to tackle disinformation, especially those disinformation actions which are happening online. And in that, I can certainly can mention the code of conduct. Well, it was a code of practice until this year, until 2024, now becoming a code of conduct which basically binds the signatories, which are large platforms, to clean, let's say, the content which is part of the platforms, which is clearly source of disinformation and misinformation. And in this, certainly also the Digital Service Act, which is entering into force, which has already entered into force at the beginning of the year, is also key in the combat that the Commission does against the online disinformation. All of this, just don't want to be so heavy and to mention too many policies and strategies which are maybe not so recent, but all of this is well grounded in all the strategies that the Commission has been developed to secure the security of the Union. Certainly the 2020 EU Security Union Strategy, and certainly the Strategic Compass, which also one of the objectives of the Strategic Compass is to group to bring together, let's say, all the different tools or the different strategies to respond to the hybrid threats in a so-called EU hybrid toolbox, which is under development. And on the practical level, just to conclude about this overview, what the Commission has done is, for instance, to create this EU hybrid fusion cell, which serves to analyze and share information regarding hybrid threats among the member states and other partner countries. Also, the Union has developed quite a few task forces or units or divisions for strategic communication to counter disinformation inside and outside the EU. And for this, I'm sure that you're aware about the task forces at the European External Action Service, which are behind the EU versus Disinfo, which is a newsletter which debunks especially Russian disinformation, especially after the invasion of Crimea after 2015, but also on the practical level, also the Commission funds research and innovation actions like the one that you are part of by means of the Horizon Europe program, but also by means of other funding programs, like I just mentioned one, the SERV program, the Citizens, Equality, Values and Rights program, which is managed by our colleagues at DG Just. Focusing now on what the Commission, what the Union is doing in the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership countries, there are certainly a number of instruments that I can still mention. The Commission wants to bid a lot, wants to invest a lot in capacity building and technical assistance in the form of training programs, workshops as well, expert advice given to national governments, specifically to combat FIMI, foreign interference, or well, the acronym is Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference, and also to strengthen the capabilities of these countries to respond to cyber attacks and to improve their cybersecurity. As said, also via this fusion cell, information sharing and analysis is very important in the strategy of the Commission. The Union, I mean, via some of its services, DG Just, DG Near, the External Service provides some assistance and some support to the national governments to develop new legislative measures in order for the Western Balkans, for instance, to adopt useful legislation to better protect their own critical infrastructures in terms of energy, in terms of telecommunications, to ensure electoral integrity, or also to combat the several issues that we are very aware, like illicit financial activities or smuggling of illicit products. And another very important, especially when it comes to enlargement policy and the new enlargement methodology, as it's called, as it has been labeled as of 2020. And renewed importance is given to the support to civil society organizations, to grassroots movements and organizations, to NGOs, in order to raise awareness about the importance of combating hybrid threats and the relevance of this information in hijacking our democratic systems and the democratic institutions of the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership countries, and also to promote the so-called media literacy and critical thinking among students and the overall population, and also to improve the fact-checking of the local organizations. And for that, you're probably aware of the EDMO hubs, European Media Digital Observatory hubs, which has exactly this role, and which is managed by my colleagues at DG Connect, and certainly linked to that, support to media and journalism, and also, of course, cooperation in a broader sense in the international fora, so NATO, the OSCE, or the UN. And maybe about more specificities regarding the Eastern Partnership, the Union wants to, of course, already included specific chapters in order to member states, the future, I mean, the wannabe member states, to focus on combating disinformation and foreign interference, chapters were included in the association agreement and deep and comprehensive free trade associations treaties, and also now a part of the negotiations as part of the accession negotiations, which started last December, especially with Ukraine and Moldova. And again, support to CSOs, NGOs, and media organizations, media outlets, independent media, to promote the pluralism and the independence of the media. And again, quite a number of programs to support the future member states, the wannabe member states, with sectoral cooperation and technical assistance to improve the capacities in ensuring their own energy safety and security, border management, which is also very crucial for the sake of the European Union, and again, electoral reforms and cybersecurity. So I think that I respond to the first part of your query, if I'm not mistaken, about what the Commission is doing, what the Union is doing in general to combat hybrid threats. And I don't know whether you wanted me also to, give a brief overview of why the Union is delaying the accession of some of the wannabe member states, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, please. If you give I know it's not an easy answer.
Yes, I don't want to. Yes, yeah. Just to be very brief, I think that's, investigating a little bit also on what is published, what is also public available to the public. I think that for the Western Balkans, the main challenges are the lack of a certain stability and satisfactory level of in terms of rule of law and democratic governance. As we know, many of these countries they struggle with corruption. They need to improve their judicial system, the framework in which the fundamental rights are respected. For this, the Union is pretty active recently, sort of recently, 2022. I'm aware that a few peer-to-peer missions have started with some of the wannabe candidate countries, like North Macedonia and Albania. Certainly, the Union wants to see better stability and reconciliation in terms of the ethnic tensions and historic ethnic tensions that are ravaging the region, which are, some of them are considered unresolved conflicts, and which certainly hamper the stability of the institutions, as we see in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we can also think about Montenegro, Kosovo, and certainly also the importance of reforms in the field of security and defense. This is also something that the Commission would like to see implemented before probably speeding up or respecting the calendar for the accession of these countries, because in terms of fighting crime and terrorism, or ensuring securing the borders and providing a proper border management, we see that there are some delays, and the Union certainly wants to see another picture before speeding up the accession talks. This is when it comes to the countries of the Western Balkans. When it comes to the Eastern Partnership countries, a big break certainly was the geopolitical complexities of the region, because they are, certainly are, and there were overlapping interests of geopolitical competitors such as Russia, although these have been changing abruptly recently with the invasion of Ukraine, which instead have speeded up the accession of Ukraine and Moldova. So I think that these are the main reasons behind some of the delays of the institutions in respecting the word that was given to these countries. And I think that's, I'm happy to answer other questions if there are.
Thank you so much for this very useful overview of the EU's policies and programs. Okay, so we only have about 15 minutes left, and I have been told that I have to finish at exactly 7:30. So I suggest that we collect some questions and then ask the panels to respond to as many as they are able to. So, and I think there might be some questions online as well. So who wants to do first? Let's start with your questions. So, no, sure. No, I'm sort of struck by thinking that we could have heard a lot of the same topics and words and frustrations 15 years ago at a similar academic panel, with the exception of the full-scale invasion, which has affected the environment. But we're looking at some of the typical enlargement dynamics, focusing on the Western Balkans in particularly. It seems to me that we've really learned nothing institutionally. Even sometimes I wonder academically, it's like we take different routes and we write in different ways and we apply different concepts. But there's still, when I hear the word stability, stability is what's gotten us to where we are since 2010, 12, let's say. Because the very stability that some have argued wrongly, I would say, is necessary for security, is precisely what keeps oligarchs and autocrats and anti-democratic actors in place, which is what opens up a place for either Trojan horses or outright aggression that we would see with like Serbsky's Fed, which is Ruski Mir. And so, I guess I'm just sort of, I hope that over the next 36 months, we can start to pull the curtain away from the false thinking, wishful thinking, and true disservice that's been done, I think, on these issues, because it's not helping the region, and it's not going to help the Eastern neighborhood either, and we all know that. I guess I don't know if I guess maybe I'll just give one question, that would be for Vladimir, is what argument would you make to an already dissatisfied European Union voter on why they should let these basket case countries in? And I'm joking when I say basket case, but honestly, I think that the enlargement fatigue is legitimate. And I haven't yet heard anyone make a good argument for why rapid succession of countries that have failed on every index over the past 15 years, with the exception of countries, I think it's ironic that it's a country like Kosovo that's doing the best on a lot of indicators and indices, and yet they're the lowest and the most pressured. So how would you sort of, especially after these elections, how would you sort of make an argument to European Union voters that they should want to let unreformed countries in tomorrow? Thanks, Valerie. I think we have a question online about the impact of the European elections. So, I wonder if you would like to comment on that as well.
Thank you. My question is for the panelists from the European Commission, and I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us how you would compare domestic laws to geopolitical considerations and bilateral disputes in terms of importance when it comes to the obstacles to the accession of Western Balkan countries to the EU right now, because we didn't hear much or anything really about these aspects in your intervention. And I'm particularly referring to the structural issues regarding the unanimity principle, which has been blocking the accession, especially of North Macedonia recently, but also Albania previously.
Sorry, I have an add-on question. And what you said, which is also to you, and so not only about the public opinion, is that the best trade or best prevention, but also take the time to think about what the interest-based institutional blocks in some of the mechanisms are that prevent the opening of chapters for university. Now, here I refer to the category of friends.
Yes, in the back, please.
I would like to ask Mr. You said that we shouldn't let aside the Western Balkans in order to join the EU. And I think 2 or 3 months ago you opened up the European Western Balkans, I think it's the site. And you talked about the growth plan. Do you think that this mechanism will have a positive effect on the integration of the Western Balkans, or will it turn out again to be a scam as people?
Yeah, this is to the panel in general. I'd love to get any reactions on the role of reactionary actors within the European Union toward your countries and your neighbors, and that impact, and how you see that merging with the geopolitical challenges. Because at least that dynamic seems evident to me from my vantage point in Sarajevo, particularly Budapest, but not just there.
Right, so some really good questions. A lot of yes.
I want to ask a question for Olga as well. Now, the misinformation on TV. What we analyze like information on like media consumption and also on the control we see them. And there are pockets of people, by substantial pockets of people, who are probably poorly exposed to this information with regards, for example, the localized more of the global world. And we have the impression that it's very, very difficult to convince them otherwise, unless we swing with their current a little bit, we'll be later. If we part of their narrative a bit and then deviate them later, then it's easier to convince them than it is if you talk to the whole thing. So this is the conundrum of information everywhere.
Thank you. Okay, we'll definitely have enough to get on with now. So I will ask each of the panelists to respond to any of the questions. You can pick and choose. And if you have anything you want to respond to what other panelists have said, then please do so as well. But please be brief, so we don't have that much time left. So Olga, you can add some questions.
Actually, I want to answer on the last question. You need to understand how vulnerable we are about Russian information. This is one of the biggest problems in my country, especially because we were deeply involved in the Russian world many years, maybe till 2022. So we use a lot of Russian propaganda products. For example, maybe a few people in this audience understand that Ukrainians used to listen Russian channels, read Russian books, and see Russian movies in our country. And only after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, the situation changed a little. And we understand the dangers of these Russian narratives. And therefore, when we understand that some of our Western partners use Russian narratives, we are in some shock, situation. This is a huge problem, and this is some red line for us. We need to stay on this position, and we need to explain every day to our partners, not to our enemies, but to our partners, that there are very few things that are really important for us. First of all, understanding from your side that this is a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is not a civil war between Ukrainians and Ukrainians, because sometimes where the point is how you talk about this. There is no, for example, the people of Donbass. This is really one of the most popular Russian narratives, and we need to explain that it is just one of the Russian movies, etc., etc. So this is very long and very complicated process, and we are deeply involved in this. For example, in this now, in the second channel, we opened the new Center for Disinformation Studies, and I just invite you to cooperate with us, and maybe some things will be more understandable for you if just the operation will be the fact more nearest future.
Actually, nice. Okay. Oh, sure. I'd like to get back to Kurt's question about the challenges coming from inside the EU for the Western Balkans for this region. Unfortunately, yeah, it's very true what Kurt mentioned. So, for instance, we see that in the case of Orban and of his links with several Western Balkan countries. And I mean, I think that's us back to the point that we need to recognize the fact that the authoritarian practices know no borders, and that we have this issue of kind of mirroring these authoritarian practices and authoritarians kind of learning from each other. So that's one. And the second one is also that it's very important to kind of be aware of the type of EU enlargement model that is being passed. So because if Orban's Hungary is the biggest champion for EU enlargement within the EU, with the kind of model it sets, then this obviously gives a very bad, very different kind of picture for the kind of EU enlargement that we want to see happening in the Western Balkans as well, right? So I think I'll go back to that point about the European Union as a norm setter, as a union that is not only an economic and transactional type of bloc, but something that really should go back to the point of propagating these values, of being proud of the values it stands for. So, if we as European Union, because me as well, I grew up in Italy and I'm Croatian, so I put myself in here. If we propagate, if we tend to kind of set this model and say to these countries that the right way to do, to be part of the club is really to stick to the rules. If the EU is consistent with its rewards in the right moment, it will then elicit a response from the EU enlargement countries, which will be much closer to what Mr. Domini was saying in terms of being, sticking to the rule of law, of being more, having no issues with security and so on and so forth. Because if we miss that boat, let's say in the case of North Macedonia, right? If we miss the window of opportunity to do things right, then unfortunately it will be easier to slide back to authoritarian practices, to issues with the rule of law and so on and so forth. So I think that maybe I'll stop with that. But this kind of going back to the value-based approach rather than this transactional approach that the EU unfortunately has got to in terms of its EU enlargement is really key to start changing hearts and minds and to get to a better place to make EU enlargement work for both its regions, for its large region as a whole.
Yes, well, I think I will say a few words about this. Why should you enlarge, and this despite of the fatigue. And the second thing is the geopolitical. What should be done with these geopolitical challenges that appear to us? And I think this is very interconnected, two questions, exactly because of these geopolitical challenges, which I don't consider, saying frankly, that these are purely geopolitical. Geopolitics in its core, it's about territorial division, actually, and about influences on the countries. Finally, it's about the territories. And even hybrid war was considered is in order to influence first, then to get territorial gains with the kinetic war we used. But still, I think in 2015, I wrote an article about it because there was a conference, and I really concentrated on the issue at that time. And then I decided that there is no way for you to continue with this transformational policy, which is absolute necessity for you. If you doesn't continue with this transformation policy, it closes by itself in its own invented idea of the normative society existing. This should continue emanating this idea of normative society outside, in the neighborhood, elsewhere, despite of the Huntington's theory that you should not make other civilizations to think like you think about. But I think that this is in a genetic code of you. This was actually becoming challenging after the Ukraine invasion, because the invasion of Ukraine in not 2022, but in 2014 was already. Oh, sorry, Ukrainian invasion by Russia. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, you so. I'm very sorry. Yes, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was already an attack on democratic world. So because maybe Ukraine was not the best democracy, Georgia is not the best democracy, Armenia is not the best democracy, and so on, Moldova, etc. But exactly the non-democratic world hits where it is weaker. So this is already democracy, and this is some people, countries which are already decided that they should become democracy, and they are hitting exactly in these weak places. They're not hitting Germany yet, Germany or France, etc. Now about the only instrument which left after 2014-15 for EU to influence this region which they wanted, which you wanted to transform into democratic region, this is neighborhood. This is to use an enlargement tool. Enlargement tool as an instrument for keeping these countries, population of these countries, under the use of threat of use of force, under the use of force, under the hybrid war against them, to keep them on the democratization track. It doesn't work more. The just soft power which EU was using before that, even introducing Eastern Partnership, it's not enough. It doesn't work more. We are talking about the crisis of Eastern Partnership. Exactly. This is other situation. This is war which is launched against not only these countries like Georgia, Ukraine, or Western Balkans. We see the same thing in Western Balkans. In Serbia, would it be, or in other Western Balkan countries? There are in Republika Srpska, for example, and others. So you will see the hybrid war that Russia conducts there. And what is the response? Response is very big doubts among the European population whether they need to engage in this or they should keep these countries away from the enlargement. And no, these countries are already, and they have been attacked because of their democratization attempts. So I'm concluding just to say again that the war is not just geopolitical in terms of territorial extensions. It's geopolitical, yes, but between the autocratic world and the democratic world. So they will not stop before democracy is not conquered, and it's not changed. This is Ukraine today. Tomorrow there is Georgia, then Armenia, then Western Balkans, some countries in Western Balkans. But finally, it comes for Europe as well, for other Europeans as well, and Americans too. So this is my. I'm sorry for being very, very strict, but this is what I feel in Georgia now.
Yeah, I know more about the time, so I'll be very, very short. So quickly on what do I tell to the EU voter? I would tell him or her that including the Western, accepting the Western Balkans in the EU would matter nothing to them. They won't change anything in their lives, the same way that Bulgaria, Romania, or Croatia won't change anything in their lives. But on the other hand, it would mean a lot for the people who live in the Western Balkans. If anything, it might be good for people from the EU, because it will bring kind of stability, security, whatever you want to call it, in the region, meaning that you will have less influence from outside actors, and because of it, it will be better also for the Europeans. But I also want to raise here a very important point. Nobody was asking these questions when Bulgaria or Romania were to join the EU. Yeah, I know EU fatigue, the enlargement fatigue is big in the EU, yes, but it's kind of interesting to think about it that when these countries were joining previous countries, nobody was asking these questions. Now, when it's time for the Western Balkans, we are raising these questions. So I think it's also telling kind of a bit there. Now, about I'm not sure I understood your question entirely, but briefly, general comment. I agree that there are many institutional problems in the Balkans. Rule of law, corruption, you already mentioned, but not just that. Like freedom of expression, freedom of media, democratic standards, but also economic. Poverty is like still 20% or even higher, not decreasing at all. Yeah, there are many issues in the Western Balkans, but what I'm saying is that it's exactly these politicians like Vučić and the others, authoritarians there, who are basically, they are the only ones who benefit from this situation. If the region was to join the EU, their power will decline. Vučić is the only actor, and those like him who like this situation that the EU keeps them like uncertain. We don't know where we will join the EU because it gives him credibility in a way to speak with the Russians, to work with the Chinese, with everybody. So if the region was to join the EU, it will lead to a decline in power of the authoritarians in the Balkans, and it will be, if anything, it will be good in this sense. Of course, we can talk, make parallels with Orban and everything, but let's leave it for later on. Very briefly, on the new growth plan of the EU for the Western Balkans, I think it won't change anything for various reasons. I put them in the article there, but I will just mention one. If you look at the amount of money that the EU made available for the Western Balkans through this new instrument, they say it's 6 billion euros over a 4-year period, but of these 6 billion, only 2 billion are grants. And if you see 2 billion over 4 years, that's 5 million euros per year. And if you take the GDP of the region of the Western Balkans, it's around 130 billion at the moment, meaning that it's only 0.3% of the current GDP. So how can you make a change with such a small amount of money? 0.3% of GDP cannot change anything. Not to mention that the European Commission said in that document that their ambition is to double the GDP of Western Balkans. It's impossible to do it. It's simple logic, not even mathematics or macroeconomics. It's simple logic. And yeah, very briefly on this. Okay, I'll take it later.
Well, we're already well past the time. So I just want to give Alberto a chance to come in. I don't know if you could hear.
Yes, well, actually, I couldn't really hear the questions. I could hear just some of the interventions of the panelists because they are closer to the mic. But I remember that there was a question specifically for me, like the second question from the audience.
Yeah, there's one question specifically for you about the significance of domestic flaws in the accession process, given the geopolitical imperatives, so the relative weight of the two. Summarize
the significance of the domestic flows.
Yes, how important are they given the geopolitical imperatives of accession?
Well, I would say that if you're referring to like the problematics, let's say the flows in terms of respect of rule of law, the anti-corruption policies, which are not necessarily like that effective in some of the Western Balkans and Eastern partnerships, I think that are very relevant. Some of course, it's very high in the agenda of the Commission to support these countries in carrying out the needed reforms, and this is also sometimes clear with some of the policy documents, but also some of the instruments that the Commission is outlining and developing. Just to remind, the rule of law report, which is an annual exercise that the Commission, DG Home, together with DG Just, they do, and they provide a number of recommendations to all the member states in order to guarantee a good quality, a good level of rule of law, and also to improve the overall picture. And as of last year, 2023, there are also like specific recommendations for the Western Balkans and for the other accession countries, something that before was not the case. So I think that this is some sort of a proof that the domestic flows, as you label them, are very relevant for the services of the European Union and for the institutions. So without them sorted out, I think that the accession of some of these countries will be delayed even more.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'm sure we could continue this discussion for, for a long time. We really have to stop now. But I think if nothing else, this has been incredibly interesting. And it's also, I think, illustrated the importance of the GEO-POWER project. There's certainly a lot to do and a lot to look at. So please join me in thanking the speakers once again for